I do feel like it's been a journey, and I'm hoping that it's something that a lot of you are maybe thinking about. Is anyone thinking about starting a company at some point, or wants to start a company at some point? Okay, so this presentation is for you, not so much the rest of the people. So hopefully by the end, other people will want to as well. And in particular, I don't come from the background that my company is in, so I thought that would also be of interest to those folks that are thinking about starting companies. And so I wanted to kind of just get out of the way. What do I mean? What are we talking about with regard to rebar and robots? Rebar is the steel reinforcement you see on a construction site. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but I just want to make sure you know what I mean by rebar. And then with robots, we're not talking about the Terminator. We're talking about industrial robots that you would see like in a car factory, using them to manipulate rebar. So that's all I'll say for now, but you'll get a little bit more of it as we go. And so the way that I've structured this is thinking about this three-legged stool of market, product, and finance. This is kind of the way that I think about the business all of the time, update our investors, that sort of thing. And so I've actually labeled the slides with those when it pertains to it, and then some of the slides that don't have that are from our pitch deck, which we used to raise our recent seed round of financing. So getting back to the journey part, this is very much about the journey that's gotten us to where we are today. We're 3 years into this, but have just closed our seed round of financing about 60 days ago, so it feels a lot like day one. But if starting a company were like a family vacation, I tried to make this kind of like the slideshow of that vacation. So quickly about me, I grew up in Massachusetts and moved to New York in 2000. I was a Lego fanatic, which I think is part of what eventually drove me to the built environment in that space. This is my second company. The first company I started was a design services agency, so we're a graphic design firm. So I was working on branding, communications, web design and development, application design and development, UI, UX, all of that. But what got me to Toggle was we were doing that for a lot of public entities like New York City and various agencies, and companies that were managing infrastructure systems like transportation and energy, and it was actually the renewable energy interest that led to Toggle. So in 2016, 3 years ago, I set out to kind of find a new opportunity after selling the first business, and was really interested in wind farms. And I got the opportunity to spend some time on a construction site for wind farms, and as you can see, the scale is just massive. Really, really interesting stuff, and a really cool building process. It turns out that it's actually already super efficient. I was going there looking for opportunities, and the way that they put these things up is very modular, not unlike Legos, and they just go up like really, really fast. Couple of days, you put up a wind turbine that's taller than the Statue of Liberty. It's really, really impressive. So not a lot of opportunity there. But the other thing that we saw on the construction site was this, which is the foundation of the wind turbine. And so this is a reinforced concrete foundation. That's the rebar, which is the steel that goes inside of the concrete. And this was a really slow and inefficient process. It was taking a team of 5 workers about 5 days just to do one foundation, and then they'd bring in 20 people to pour the concrete on it. So it'd take about a week and a half or 2 weeks for one foundation. And this is in Austria, but in the US or in Latin America, you might be putting up 50 turbines at a clip. So you can imagine how much time that takes. And so that was in Austria. I came back to New York and started visiting construction sites to see how rebar was done here. And so this is you can see 125 Greenwich Street. That's the project that this was on. And that's myself and my co-founder and one of our advisors who since joined the team. And so what we're trying to determine is there a problem in this part of the construction industry? And hopefully, as you can see from this picture, yes, there is a problem. Huge inefficiency costing the construction industry, a ton of money. I think that number's from McKinsey. Took this photo earlier this year, but you'll see this, all over the place. The problem, well, I'll get into the problem in a little bit more depth, but I want to go off on a little tangent just on the broader context now about the market opportunity and sort of how big is this problem. So reinforced concrete, which is rebar inside of concrete, it's basically the fundamental building block of all large-scale construction. So it's on 100% of construction sites, and it's just completely ubiquitous. So anytime you see that, you have this rebar inside of it. And what's driving this market to get even larger is the fact that the world is building cities at an unprecedented rate. Everyone's moving to cities. The cities are getting larger, they're getting more complex, and the reinforced concrete is that basic building block for these cities. And then in addition to that, you have infrastructure systems, which if you think about bridges, tunnels, power plants, all of these things, they're also all made of reinforced concrete. And we're building new infrastructure. Some of it is part of those cities, but some of it is the rehabilitation of existing systems. And so you start to get the idea that we use a lot of this stuff, and yet the way that we build with it really just hasn't changed. So on the left, you have actually the Guggenheim Museum in Midtown, and then on the right, you have a high-rise, also here in Manhattan, doing the exact same thing. So that was kind of the backstory on this niche within the construction market that convinced us there was an opportunity here. And so, we thought, okay, well, we have these great industrial robots that exist in the automotive industry. Let's just use those to fix this problem. And so at that moment, this was about a year into it, we said, okay, we have a problem, we have an idea for a solution, let's go out and raise money. And so I came from a graphic design background, so I whipped out Photoshop and I took this photo of a construction site for a wind farm, and I photoshopped an industrial robot onto it. And this is actually from our deck, from our first VC pitch. I took this to Ben Einstein and Chris Quintero at Bolt in Boston, and we pitched this to them, and they passed. So we went back to the market. And this is something, again, that I think from my design background, in design, you spend a lot of time on discovery, really talking to the end users, immersing yourself in the problem, understanding where are the opportunities, what are the resources that are available, what are the constraints. So my co-founder and I, we worked in a rebar fabrication facility. We saw how the steel comes into the country and ships. We went to the steel mills. We really spent more time in the rebar side of the market, and then we also researched what are the actual solutions that are available on the technology side. What is the manufacturing industry actually doing? So we went to industrial automation and Industry 4.0 trade shows. We went to the leading academic institutions all over the place. This is ETH in Zurich, but we went to Caltech, and we went to MIT, and we went to Stanford, and we went to Worcester Polytechnical and Stevens in New Jersey, and we saw what are people doing on sort of the cutting edge of this space of robots for architecture and construction. And one of the things that we also saw while we were working in the rebar fabrication plants was this process, which is sort of like what you see on the construction site, but it's in a factory and they're pre-assembling columns for a building. And you have this team of workers here wrestling with this rebar, and this is their job all day, every day, but it happens in a factory, not on a construction site. And so that was really interesting because we thought, okay, robots work well in a factory, you don't have to Photoshop them onto a construction site. Maybe this is actually a better approach. And another thing that we started to really understand was that all of the shapes aren't the same. You need to produce lots of different shapes and sizes to serve the construction industry. It's not like manufacturing in that you're not just pumping out 10,000 BMWs that are all identical. You have to accommodate all these different shapes and sizes. So at this point, we started to prototype, and we're very fortunate in that we found an incubator called the Consortium for Research in Robotics in the Brooklyn Navy Yard that's run by Pratt Institute, which is the architecture firm in Brooklyn, or architecture school in Brooklyn, sorry. And so we started just like really low fidelity. We had only remember we had been rejected by investors, so we're still spending our own money. So we were scavenging in the parking lot for pallets that we pulled apart, and we made these wooden prototypes. And gradually at this space where we had access to industrial robots, we started to begin to understand what it would look like to bring these things together. And so small robot first, larger robot, but still wooden pallet fixtures. And we also started to build a team. So I don't want to give the impression that I learned robotics myself overnight or even over 3 years. We did start to build a team once we had an understanding of what technology, what skills, what disciplines we actually were going to need to put in place a solution. Okay, we said, again, we have a problem. Now we have a proof of concept. Let's raise money. And so we went to angels. We went to more VCs. We applied to Techstars. They all passed. So this is now kind of spring of 2017 or 2018. But we got really lucky and we found this accelerator called UrbanX, which is sort of like a niche or a more boutique accelerator that focuses exclusively on urban tech, and BMW is actually one of the sponsors of this, and so they were particularly interested in the fact that we were using manufacturing technology, and they took us on. So we got a little bit of money, and we got to go into this program, which was really, really helpful in helping us to kind of figure out the missing pieces of the puzzle that we needed to turn this into a fundable and eventually scalable business. And so we took that experience and we took that little bit of money, we rented, or I should say we sublet space in someone else's rebar fabrication facility, but it was sort of our own space, and we started to actually fabricate cages on a small scale, but we're starting to actually serve construction projects here in the New York market. And so we had a revenue model now, which was really exciting, which is assembling, well, really, it starts with fabrication, which is cutting and bending bars, and then taking those two-dimensional shapes and assembling them into three-dimensional shapes. And it's all basically dollars by the ton. So that started to take shape. And in this accelerator program, we also got to kind of clarify and articulate our go-to-market strategy, which after a while we realized we're developing this technology which is really quite different from what the rebar fabrication industry is accustomed to. We're going to have a really hard time selling it to them. So we realized that we're going to have to become a rebar fabricator, and we'll apply our own technology and actually sell the rebar. And so we took this approach to the market where we're actually a factory ourselves. It's a full stack business where we're doing hardware, we're doing software, we're doing process. It's all in our own factory facility, and what we're actually selling is the material, the steel, to the construction projects. And we realized that if we did that in one market, we could sell around $50 million worth of rebar, and then there are 27 markets in the US that are high growth construction markets, and then you conquer the world. So okay, again, now we have a problem and a solution and a go-to-market strategy, and we have a little bit of traction. So we went out to try to raise money again, and that's how I met these guys. We pitched over 100 VCs, and 3 of them said yes. So this was about 2 months ago. We closed our seed round. So Point72 Ventures led. And again, we were really fortunate. It turns out that their particular thesis around AI and around this kind of category of business was basically that if you find businesses that are extremely resource intensive that also have the potential to generate a lot of data, you can build a model to optimize all of that data and make better decisions in the business, and then take that business that was really capital or resource intensive and expand the profit margins on it. And that was kind of their thesis, and we fit perfectly into it, or so so it would seem. So so that was a great turning point for us in all of this. And so this week we moved our robotics operation, our R&D, out to Long Island. It's a lot cheaper out there. We have more space. That's our CTO Mike calibrating the robot on a shop vac box. This is our fabrication operation in Canarsie, Brooklyn. That's the actual product going out the door. So that's what we ship to customers: truckloads of assembled rebar cages. The way that we're doing this in terms of our go-to-market is we've started out by just assembling cages. Then we're going to become a fabricator where we actually supply the steel. We cut and bend it and then assemble it ourselves. And basically, it allows us to gradually go up the food chain and capture more and more of the economics of this. I see I'm out of time already. Okay, so basically, this is sort of where we are today. We still have just one robot, and so it's a collaborative process with a person and a robot. Our approach is not to automate everything. It's to use robots what robots are good for, and people what people are great at. But we will continue to automate, and there's going to be more here. But just this process, because the worker isn't doing all of the heavy lifting. And because the robot is doing it, we can have half the labor and basically double the speed on just this process. So from rebar, we'll go to some other stuff, and that's the journey. Thank you. I'd love to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was fantastic. Quick one for me,
Sure.
real quick. So why do you think it's taken so long for, what's the main inhibitor for adoption of this type of tech in construction? Is it, there's a lot of folks that just like the way that it's always been? Is it tough to sell it? I just would love to hear kind of some of the struggles that you faced in construction.
So that's a great question, because this is happening, this introduction of new technology into construction is happening across a lot, really all the categories in construction, and there's a lot of reasons, but a big driver of it really is the labor. The historical model was that you would send all these materials to a construction site, and then you would send an army of cheap labor there to put it all together. And that cheap labor is really going away. The wages are rising, the number of people that are going into construction is declining, the projects, as I showed you on some slides, are proliferating, so there's just way more construction, and so labor is really constrained. And it varies from market to market, but it's definitely a macro trend. So I think that's really one of the major drivers of this. And then of course, the technology has matured quite a bit. So in software, the cost of all of the technological ingredients has gone down.
Awesome, thank you. Oh, got a few.
So I'm curious what your plan is for scaling the business. You have one robot now. I assume you're hoping to have more that'll increase output. But how do you capture the country or the world? Does it require putting 100 or 1,000 robots in different locations, or is the model ultimately to sell the robot, license it, robot as a service, to a customer that can then make their own rebar for cheaper than they were doing it before?
Well, there's a couple different models. Initially, like I said, we found that it would be difficult to sell this type of technology into the kind of incumbents or the legacy industry, and that it would be better to become a fabricator ourselves. And so the initial strategy will be to focus on having a physical presence where we can physically deliver material to a market like New York City. New York City happens to be the largest construction market in the country, so it's a great place for us to start. But we'll go to other markets. We'll go to LA, we'll go to Chicago, we'll go to really the urban centers where a lot of construction is happening. And then we'll also begin to make the system itself, more modular, more portable, so that if you're building an airport, say, and you're going to be doing major construction for 2 or 3 years, we could put a fabrication facility that's sort of like a pop-up there, and maybe we put it on the back of 2, trucks, and we can take it out to a solar installation or a wind farm that's being constructed, so that we can serve those. And down the road, we may license it as well. There's the precast industry, which I mentioned, which is already set up in a very manufacturing kind of centric paradigm, and so they would be a good adopter, to license the technology. But there's a lot of different options, and one of the things that I just can't emphasize enough is how large the market is, how much rebar and reinforced concrete gets consumed all over the world. So anywhere you go where there's construction, there's so much demand for this stuff.
Awesome. We got one back here.
Hi, just wondering, did either yourself or your co-founder come from the construction industry? And if not, how are you able to convince kind of Bolt that you are the right person for the job or the task at hand?
Neither one of us did directly. Like neither one of us worked, directly in construction or on construction projects. So, I think that part of it was certainly just the amount of time that we've spent in the last 3 years, getting to know it. So, I think we have learned quite a bit about this, fairly narrow, slice of the construction industry. But we've also built a team, and that's really the answer. Is that we've brought on. I had a picture of him up there. We had an advisor in the beginning who's an advisor. He spent his entire career in rebar in construction. He's joined the company and has been very close since the beginning. And the team has really been the way to answer that question, to bring that knowledge in.
Awesome, Dan. We got one last one back here.
Sorry, I think this is sort of asked, but I wanted to ask it a different way. In the construction industry, you've got like the big C&Es, they hire a bunch of subcontractors. There's a ton of moving pieces. Like where in the value chain are you looking to get buy-in from? Because there's so many people and it gets subbed out, and material suppliers, all these different parties.
Where do we fit in the value chain?
Yeah, well, who do you turn to find like to sell this kind of thing to?
Oh, okay. So our customer is typically a concrete company. So you have the owner, the developer, you have their GC or their construction manager, you have the concrete company is usually the largest sub, and they're the ones that are responsible for buying rebar. So we're called a tier 3 material supplier, and we supply to the concrete company.
Awesome, Dan. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Thank you.